Summer Sweetheart, Chapter 31. Alisa tilted her head to one side, avoiding his sharp eyes, and said coldly, "It's none of your business." "Whose business is that?" Carl stared at her closely. His tall and broad figure directly blocked her retreat, not giving her a chance to escape. Alisa could clearly smell the unique freshness of his body, but it did not affect his extremely oppressive aura. Her heart was beating and she felt that every additional word she said was a flaw. Luther is not an ordinary straw bag master. He is far more intelligent and sensitive than she imagined. "Stop talking." Carl stepped back suddenly. Alisa thought he was finally going to let her go, but the next second her heart was lifted again. Carl looked at her and said quietly, "Go and wash your face." Alisa bit her lip, suddenly looked at the door of the restaurant with a surprised look and called out, "Dad!" When Carl heard this, he disapproved. This kind of thing is too naive. Alisa's face did not show the embarrassment that he had pierced through, but instead frowned and looked embarrassed. Carl was suspicious, turned and looked behind him, only to find that it was empty behind him. Alisa took advantage of his turnaround and ran away. Carl was stunned for 2 seconds, raised his foot to catch up, but stopped suddenly. "No hurry. Japan is far away." He turned and sat back at the dining table and continued to eat. "It's much more delicious than those made by my staff." Alisa ran back to her room, panted against the door panel, and squatted down. She was almost scared to death by Luther just now. Although she didn't deliberately pretend to be ugly, there will always be unnecessary trouble explaining. After this incident, Luther was already a super dangerous person in her heart. Unless he moved, otherwise she must find a way to move out. Alisa lay back on the bed after washing up and received a cold call. "Alisa, Hunt's official Twitter said that tomorrow they will make a public explanation about the video. What do they want to do?" Alisa sneered. "They want me to come forward and explain the misunderstanding to the media." "The video is a real hammer. How do they want you to explain? Ask you to force back off the pot?" The calm tone was already stained with anger. Alisa said indifferently, "Then carry it back." She soothed Tina, then turned on Twitter on the computer and found that Hunt's official Twitter had indeed posted a Twitter saying that she would clarify the video. Tomorrow the Hunt's people should be looking for her. Sure enough, early the morning, Colin called. "The company just happened to have a new product launch today. Go to the site and explain the video by the way." Alisa's voice is clever. "Okay." When Alisa opened the door and went out, she looked around very cautiously and found that there was indeed no suspicious person suspected of Luther, so she was relieved and boldly carried her bag. She ate something casually on the road and went to the place of Hunt's new product launch. Rachel stood at the door and looked around, probably waiting for her. As soon as she saw Alisa, Rachel greeted her. "Why did you come so late? What are you doing with a mask?" Alisa lowered her throat, making her voice sound slightly hoarse. "I have a cold." Rachel didn't ask much and took her to a conference room. Colin and Isabella both here. Isabel threw her the speech that she had prepared earlier in her hand. "The reporter will ask you later what you should say and what should not be said. They are all written on it." Alisa opened her eyes, and flash of mockery flashed in her eyes. Summarizing the content of the speech, it is nothing more than to let Alisa take the responsibility on herself and let her take the topic of ugly people are frequent on Twitter to the subsequent video incidents, all on her own. Let her admit that she is creating a hype. Then think so well. After all, she will be a screenwriter in the future. Although she is only behind the scenes, she is still a member of the entertainment industry. It is said that the hype can be explained. Soon Colin's assistant knocked on the door and came in. "Mr. Hunt, everybody is ready." "Yeah." Colin looked at Alisa and said sternly, "Have you remembered the contents of the speech? It doesn't matter if you can't remember. You just need to know that everything is your fault." "Yeah." Alisa nodded, very obedient. The door of the conference room was pushed open and a group of reporters walked in. You don't need to guess that she knows that these reporters were brought by Colin early in the morning. If she said something different from the speech, she would definitely not be broadcasted. Alisa studied in film school and knew a lot about the entertainment industry. She casually glanced at it and found that the logos on a few microphones were familiar. If she remembered it correctly, it was company under Adampic Media. Adampic Media is the largest comprehensive group in the industry. It has strong financial resources and a victorious looking founder. Even the company's employees are very willful. For example, it is not easy to be sold. At the beginning of the interview, the microphones with the Adampic Media logo squeezed directly in front of Alisa. Miss Hunt, what you and your sister Isabel say is true to the last video? You were forced to marry into Adam's family? Alisa didn't take the mask. She watched the reporter for a few seconds and then reacted, saying slowly, "No, I wanted to marry into Adam's family." Her reaction was seen by these reporters. They had heard that Miss Hunt was a bit stupid before, and it seemed that there was something wrong with her mind. Colin and the three of them all showed satisfaction when they heard that what Alisa said. You want to marry a rich family, so you have to marry your sister's place in Adam's house. She is your own sister. How can you treat her this way? Even if you grow up like this, Master Adams won't look down on you, right? The reporter's questions came one after another, which can almost be said to be an attack in life. A reporter who was not afraid of things even asked her, "Is young Master Adams no good as the rumors do? Will you stay in it and treat it a widow for your money? Will you cheat to find a mister in the future?" In order to gain attention, unscrupulous media people have no conscience. Alisa looked at the reporter. Her mask covered half of her face. Her forehead was covered with thick bangs. Only a pair of eyes were exposed, which was surprisingly clear and bright. The reporter was inexplicably chilled by the look in her eyes. At this time, Alisa slowly said, "Even if you have a hobby of listening of others people's husbands and wives' intercourse, I can't take my husband's intercourse to the public. After all, I want a face." When the voice fell, the other reporters couldn't help laughing. Chapter 32. What Alisa meant in his word was to mock the reporter's shameless behavior in asking people about their intercourse between husband and wife in public. The reporter who asked the question naturally understood it. The reporter present were indeed all paid by Colin, mainly because they wanted to take this opportunity to watch Isabel. So most of them just directed questions to Alisa, but only this reporter asked Carl in order to gain eyeballs thing. The Adams family is powerful and influential, and most people can't afford it, but there are some lucky people who want to walk a tightrope and take risks to provoke the family. The reporter was turned pale and blushed by other people's smile. He simply broke the jar and said viciously, just like this, "If it wasn't for Carl's failure, could you marry into Adam's family? It's hidden a woman like you who robbed your sister's fiancé in order to marry a wealthy family will definitely cheat." Although Alisa had never seen Carl's appearance until now, she didn't want to involve Carl in these troubles subconsciously. Carl has a weird personality which is related to his previous experience. No matter whether he can do it in that way or not, this should not be discussed by these people in the public. Derailed. Is there a more promising man in Drostenville? Alisa laughed. Eyes bent into crescent shapes and her tone was lightened. We live in a harmony as a husband and wife. If you don't believe me, you can ask my husband Carl by yourself. In the reporter's expectation, Alisa would be yelled at by anger, but they didn't want to be calmly stunned by Alisa. As for asking Carl, don't talk about Carl. They don't even have the qualifications to meet Carl. Even if they see Carl, they are too late to flatter. How dare they ask such questions? Other reporters who were eager to try realized that they were not only interviewing the third lady in a small business who was not loved by her parents, but the young lady of the Adams family. Although this young lady who had just married into Adams' house seemed not to be favored either, no one knew anything about the wealthy family. As a result, these reporters unanimously changed their previous sharpness and asked questions more euphemistically. Do you have a good relation with your sister Isabel? Alisa smiled in good faith. I liked her very much when I was young. When I grew up, I didn't like her anymore. Your mother loves your sisters. Well, she is pretty good. Rachel was very nice to Isabel. It was not until the end that the reporters remembered that they had collected Colin's money and they brought the problem back to the video. Someone on the internet said that the video was actually made by you to deliberately anger your sister, and then you brought the paparazzi to shoot it deliberately. In fact, you were making a hype. Alisa was silent for nearly half a minute and then nodded yes. After the interview was over, Isabel walked over angrily as soon as the reporter left. Let you simply admit that you are hype and hesitate to do so for long. Did you do it on purpose? After she finished speaking, she couldn't help but raise her hand to hit Alisa. Alisa had already been paying attention to the Isabel's movements. She pretended to inadvertently step back half a step, letting Isabel's palm fell empty. When Isabel saw this, she became even more angry, staring at Alisa. Dare you hide? Isabel. Colin stopped Isabel's move to hit Alisa again. When Isabel saw Colin, she walked over with a grieved expression. Dad, the reporter asked her if she was creating a hype. She hesitated for so long. Colin glanced at Alisa. His eyes was full of scrutiny. Such ingenious words are not something a fool can say at all. Alisa looked at Colin, uncovered her mouth and bit her lip and said with a little fear, Dad, I haven't eaten breakfast yet. I am a little hungry. I can go. Colin turned his head and looked at Rachel. You follow and buy her something to eat. Alisa and Rachel walked out of the building one after another. Alisa. Rachel suddenly stepped forward to hold Alisa. Alisa turned her head and her eyes calm. Mom, what's the matter? Master Adams. Rachel seemed to be embarrassed and she hesitated for a moment before saying, Is he the same as the rumored one, or is he healthy? Alisa was startled and then lowered her head to make a shy look. Mom, how do you ask this kind of question? Seeing her like this, Rachel frowned slightly and said, You have to tell Mom the truth, whether Carl's body is wrong. If he is healthy, you are not worthy of him. Your sister is the original appointment as his fiancée. Alisa was really shocked. If she understood correctly, what Rachel's word meant was if Carl's body is okay, she should divorce Carl and let Isabel get married. Alisa almost laughed angrily. If Carl hadn't been disfigured and had a healthy body, it would be impossible for Isabel and me to take turns. In order to make Rachel happy all these years, she was too tired to pretend to be at Hunt's house, and now she is too lazy to pretend. She is your sister. Rachel was dissatisfied with her calling Isabel's name. Lisa just asked her, Am I your biological daughter? Rachel's brow frowned deeper. Alisa, how do you say this? You weren't like this before. That's because she was willing to be stupid and cooperate willingly. But now she doesn't want to cooperate and she doesn't want to be wronged. She didn't want to say a word with Rachel anymore. She turned around and left. Rachel called her behind. She quickened her pace and soon disappeared among the crowd. Rachel is her biological mother after all. Although she persuaded herself not to care, she still inevitably felt sad. She walked at the back of the crowd, crossing the road absently. Suddenly the whistle of the car rang and she looked up, not paying attention to her feet, and suddenly tripped over something. Although she dressed thickly in winter, she was still hissed with pain when she fell on her knees. The sound of opening the door came to the ear. Before she raised her head to see who the person was, she heard a familiar voice, Alisa, crossing the road. Do you want to die? Alisa glanced intently, and the man in suit who looked like a dog in front of her was Luther. She was in bad mood right now, and she didn't want to see this man even more. She gritted her teeth and stood up from the ground, turned around and was about to leave, but a generous palm grabbed her wrist, and her voice was different and deep. Did you fall? Alisa was silent, trying to shake his hand away but didn't. The next moment, when she became lighter, she was beaten up by Luther.